we've got a couple more people. I'm just going to go ahead and get started here. So I'm going to talk about today the USDA's Rural Energy for America program, also known as REAP, and the MDAR Agricultural Energy Grant, which is a state program here in Massachusetts. And I just want to let you know I've peppered this PowerPoint with pictures of farms I've worked with in the past who received one or both of these grants. So this is Ferrandino Farm that you're seeing here. They're in, I can't remember where they are, but they are a maple sugar farm, and they got a new evaporator and a reverse osmosis piece of equipment to help with that. They were awarded over $30,000 in grant money from both REAP and MDAR, and as far as I know, they were pretty happy with that. Okay, there we go. So these are the grant agencies that we're dealing with. USDA Rural Development, that is a federal grant agency, which means that the money comes from the federal government. And the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture, which, as you can guess by the name, is a state grant agency. And then the Massachusetts Farm Energy Program, which is sort of part of MDAR. It's their sort of boots on the ground for helping farms with their energy projects. That's the program that I run. And if you ever need help with that, you can just contact me. All my contact info is at the end of this presentation, so we'll get to that. The grants available that we're going to talk about today are the REAP grant, as I mentioned, the MDAR grant. And I did just want to put in a plug for the Mass Farm Energy Program. We do have some money, not a ton, but a little, for helping farms install energy projects, either energy efficiency or renewable energy, and we can help you fund your audits. So a lot of these grants or a lot of projects will require that you have an audit or some kind of assessment to quantify the energy savings, and the Mass Farm Energy Program helps cover the cost of that. So first we're going to talk about REAP. This is a ground-mounted solar array at Honey Pot Farm in Hatfield. They received a $16,000 grant from MDAR and over $11,000 from REAP to help them install that, and it just went up recently, and as far as I know, it's functioning and saving a lot of energy for the farm. So REAP grant, the first thing everyone wants to know is how much money can I get? So REAP covers up to 25% of eligible project costs. Eligible project costs vary somewhat by project, but there are certain things that I know are ineligible, like if you're going to put solar on a roof and you're also going to redo your roof, that doesn't count as an eligible cost. It's not part of the solar project, it's just something you're doing at the same time. That's when that comes up a lot. If you're not sure what costs are eligible or not eligible, just ask, and I'll either figure it out or I can ask the nice people at USDA. They're very helpful, and they help me a lot with specific questions that come up with farms. You can also see here there are minimum and maximum grant requests. I don't run into that a whole lot. Most projects fall somewhere in between those two amounts. I do want to mention here there are two rounds for REAP. So there's one that happens in the spring. That's the one we're in right now. That's the unrestricted round. So your project can be any size up to these maximums. And you just request 25% of the cost. If you have a $100,000 project, you can request $25,000. The fall round is a special set-aside round designed for smaller projects. So the maximum that could be requested during that is a $20,000 grant, meaning that the maximum target project cost is $80,000. Another thing that comes up frequently is people want to apply in the fall, but their project costs more than $80,000. You can still do that, but you cannot ask for more than $20,000. So if you have a large project, it behooves you to apply in the spring because you can get more of a chunk of your costs covered. Oh, I do have a slide. Okay, so here are the eligible costs. You can see this is just an example. This doesn't cover every single thing that's eligible or ineligible. Some of the ineligible things are farm equipment, or if you're going to upgrade like a refrigeration or a maple syrup equipment, you can't get used. It has to be new equipment. And you guys can read it. There's a whole list of things that are eligible and ineligible. Some of the things I want to point out that are eligible, if you only have 1 meter for your residence and business, putting in a second meter is an eligible cost. Anything that is going to come from your contractor, like if they have fees and stuff, that's all covered. And I'll make sure I send this slide out so you guys have a list. And the other thing that comes up a lot is what technologies are eligible. Just about anything that's going to increase energy efficiency on your farm or that's going to provide renewable energy is eligible for a REAP grant, provided that it's commercially available. So if there's something that's like experimental or currently being researched, that's not eligible, but I have yet to run into that in the years I've been doing this. Most people go with something that's already happening. I've circled solar here because solar is hands down the most popular thing that I help farms with. There is a huge demand for solar. And solar thermal just means solar hot water. Solar PV is solar electric. There are not as many solar hot water projects happening on farms, but it's absolutely a technology that I'm going to talk about a little bit more later. And solar PV is by far the most popular. But I have done REAP applications, as I've shown, for maple syrup equipment, and you can do it for any energy efficiency project, lighting, ventilation, refrigeration, everything that's listed up here. And then who is eligible for REAP? So hopefully most of you out there listening are eligible as an ag producer, so an individual or entity that receives 51% or more of their gross income from agricultural production. That will be defined by your taxes. For REAP, you do have to submit your past 3 years of tax returns, so whatever's shown on your federal taxes are what they're going to base that on. Excuse me. And on the other hand, if you're not a farm, you can still qualify as long as you are a for-profit small business, so not a nonprofit, and you're in a rural area. USDA has a specific definition of rural area, because people are like, oh, I'm totally rural, but it depends on their specific definition, which is that you have to be in a city with less than 50,000 in population and not contiguous or adjacent to an urbanized area. So that would be a city with a population greater than 50,000. I've linked here to the, somewhere, I know. Well, oh, here we go. At the bottom here where it says rural area website, I've linked to their map. So when I send this out, you guys can just click on that and check. You basically just put in your address and it will tell you if you are in an eligible rural area or not. It comes up either red for no or green for yes. It's very clear. And so you can qualify as either an ag producer or rural small business. There's absolutely no difference. It's just a way into the program. So there's not really a benefit to being one or the other. It's just whatever works the best for you. So if you are an ag producer but you don't get 51% or more, you can still qualify as a rural small business. There are definitely options for either of those. And if you're a small business like a retail or a restaurant, I've worked with a couple of restaurants, you can still qualify for this grant. So what is a small business is the next question. There is something called the NAICS code, the NAICS. It's the North American Industry Classification System, and I've just snipped out a little piece of it here for you to see. This is something that's listed on your taxes. If you're a farm, it's on your Schedule F. And it is this, I think, 6-digit code that you see on the left there. And there's one for every conceivable kind of farming or business. And then it says you have to have, according to your taxes again, less than $0.75 million, which I think is $750,000 per year. Usually most farms and businesses I work with have no problem being smaller than that. But if you're a lot bigger than that, then you have to either qualify as an ag producer or not go for REAP. That's usually not a problem here in Massachusetts. You can also try to qualify under that line on the bottom. If you're a business and affiliate, net worth is less than $15 million with an annual profit of less than $5 million. I haven't had anyone have to do that, but it is a possibility. And I have the PDF that has the entire list of every NAICS code known to man. And So you don't have to try and dig it up on the internet. You can just contact me and I will find it for you real quick, or I can send you the PDF. All right, so let's look at the actual application because that's what everyone wants to know. This is a lovely shot of Little Brook Farm in Sunderland. They also did a solar PV array. They were awarded $16,000 from MDAR and another $11,000 from REAP. So they had a little over half the cost of this project covered. So what are the components of an application? There's obviously the application itself, which is a PDF that the USDA has put together. I am currently working on making the new one for 2018 fillable so that it's easy for people to fill out. I highly recommend that if you can, you try and fill it out on the computer in the PDF. There are places where it autofills for you, so if you put in your name in one place, it will automatically fill it in into others. There used to be a drop-down menu that you could only do on the computer. I think they might have done away with that this year. But it's just good to know that you can fill it out on the computer. If that's not an option, you absolutely can print it out and handwrite it in. It just takes a little longer. So there's that PDF, and then there's all these attachments. So the first thing you'll need is a contractor proposal. Usually, since I've worked with a lot of solar things, this comes from a solar company. If you're doing some kind of equipment or upgrade or refurbishment, you'll have some contractor who's going to, install the refrigeration for you, or who's selling you the reverse osmosis equipment or whatever it is. And they will have a proposal that shows you what the cost is going to be. And that's something you need to include. You need to document the cost. Typically, this comes from the contractor also, so I've listed it there. You need a budget breakdown. So in addition to just having the flat cost, you need to have that broken down into categories. I'm probably going to stick with solar as an example because it's a little easier to understand. Some of those categories are labor, fees, and equipment. So you need to have the budget broken down into how much the solar panels actually cost, how much it's going to cost to install them, if there's any fees associated with it. And there's a variety of other categories, but it's just something I like to make sure people know so they can ask their contractors or electrician or whoever for a breakdown of it. This year, REAP is also requiring the cut sheets, which are sort of like the technical specs on the equipment, and they are going to require that even for solar. This is a new requirement to me, so I haven't actually been through it yet, but it's something that I will help you navigate. Again, this should come from a contractor with no problem. They should know and have the cut sheets. We're just going to need to make sure we include a copy of them. As I said before, you'll need your past 3 years of tax returns. If you are a new business or farm that hasn't existed for 3 years, that's okay. You can still apply. What you'll need to do is have as many years of tax returns as you have with you, and then have probably your accountant do a projection for the next year or 2 years, depending on how many years you have. And it's something that we can also work with the USDA on, making sure we have the right requirements for that. You may or may not need an energy audit. I will get to that in more detail in just a moment, but it's something to keep in mind. And then I've highlighted in red here the commitment of funds. This is the most important thing. The USDA asks that I pay special attention to it. So this grant covers only 25% of the cost. You need to have the other 75% covered, and you need to have documentation of that. This is worth the most points. It's where most applications fall down in terms of scoring. And you can have this through anything. You can have just a bank statement that shows you have the rest of the money in your account, loans that you've taken out that you're going to do to support it, like the Mass Solar loan or something else. If you have any other grants that have been awarded, like if you've already gotten the MDAR grant, you know that. That's a big one. But it is really, really important that you have as much documentation as possible so you can get all the points. And I do have a slide that shows the points breakdown, so we'll get to that also. If you're doing a renewable energy project, so a huge solar array that costs more than $200,000, you will need a feasibility study, which is more in depth than an audit. I haven't had a whole lot of this come up. Most people don't have projects that cost more than that, but it is something to keep in mind because feasibility studies can take a while and they can cost more than a typical audit. There's a bunch of supplemental forms that the USDA has also sent to me, so you don't need to worry about tracking those down individually. I'll make sure you get all of them. Those are things like talking about your veteran status, if that's a thing that you have, and a variety of other just like things that you have to check off because it's a federal program. And then there's the environmental info, which was also updated just in the fall of last year. Because this is a federal program and you have to make sure you're in compliance with all the federal laws about the environment, there's a whole environmental form that you have to fill out, which I will again get into more detail in just a minute here. And the other thing is the federal ID numbers. So you need to have a DUNS number and a SAM cage code. I have more slides about these, but I just want to mention that I did a previous webinar, I believe it was last fall, but it might have been last spring, which is up on the Mass Farm Energy website that goes into detail about how to get a DUNS number and a SAM code. I've linked to that here in case anybody wants to watch it. It's a lot shorter than this webinar because it was a lot less information to cover. And I noticed that the USDA also included pages of instructions for these in their new application packet. But if you have questions or if you have problems with getting these two numbers, please let me know. It's one of the many things we can help you with. And I will get into those in more detail in just a minute. So, do you need an audit or an assessment? This is a question that comes up a lot because it's something that needs to be done ahead of time. The main difference between an audit and an assessment is that an assessment is targeted towards one project or the replacement of one piece of equipment, so it's sort of on a smaller scale, and an audit is more comprehensive, covering multiple energy efficiency opportunities. Typically, it looks at the energy use of your entire farm or business. It also differs in who can perform an audit or an assessment, but there's not like a hard and fast rule. There's a whole list of people who can do either one, so we can get into that individually if anyone is at that point. For an energy efficiency application, so for anything that you're doing that is upgrading and increasing your efficiency, so if you're getting a more efficient refrigerator or if you're getting a reverse osmosis machine for your maple syrup that's going to decrease the energy you use, you absolutely need an audit or assessment because you need a quantification of how much energy you're saving. So you have to have a qualified auditor or assessor go over how much energy you're currently using, how much energy you will be using, and how much energy it's saving. You can see that the more your project costs, the more stringent the audit has to be. But once you have an audit, it's good for 4 to 5 years. It qualifies for this grant and the MDAR grant, and you can use it for a variety of things. The good thing with REAP is if you're doing a renewable energy project, so if you're just installing solar and it doesn't cost more than $200,000, you don't need an audit. You can just use the proposal from the solar contractor, and that will have how much energy it's going to generate, and because you're not increasing the efficiency of something, you don't need a baseline energy use to start with. The solar contractors will usually be able to look at your bills and sort of get at how much electricity you're currently using, or if it's not electricity, if you're doing like solar thermal and you're using oil or whatever, they can usually get at how much you're using, so they make sure they size the system appropriately. So how do I get an audit? As I mentioned, the Mass Farm Energy Program, which is me, has help covering the cost of an audit. So we cover up to 75% of the cost, and the farm usually only has to pay 25%. This is a cost share, which is different than a lot of other grants. And what that means is that you only ever have to pay the 25%, and MFEP will pay the rest directly to the auditor. So with the REAP grant and, in fact, the MDAR grant, they're reimbursable, meaning you need to have the total cost up front, and then you get reimbursed for it afterwards. This is not like that. You only have to ever pay the 25%. We'll pay the rest. Everyone asks me, how much is the 25%? I looked back at my notes. Typically, farms end up paying only between $500 and $800, and the audits are usually somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000, so it's a pretty good deal. Once you have an audit, you can use it for both of the grants, and there are maybe some other grants that might come up that you can use it for as well, like the NRCS grants. A full Ag EMP is an agricultural energy management plan. That is a more comprehensive type of audit that follows a certain structure that will be accepted by NRCS, and that will cost a little more, but MFEP will still help to cover it. So all you have to do is contact me. Again, all my contact info will be at the end of this presentation, and I can help you with that. We do have an auditor that I can refer you to. We have an engineering partner that we work with, and they have a lot of experience doing audits for farms, but you aren't required to use them. You can use any qualified auditor of your choice. Okay, so the DUNS number. This is a barrier for a lot of applications. Farms and businesses are really confused about it. DUNS stands for Dun and Bradstreet Data Universal Numbering System, which is a mouthful. It's a copyrighted proprietary means of identifying businesses. It's basically just a unique number that the federal government uses to identify you as a business in whatever state you're in. And a lot of farms and businesses already have them, they just don't know it. And what you can do is you can go on the DUNS website and put in your address and or the name of your farm or business, and it will come up and tell you, like, here's your number. And then you just log in and make sure all the information they have in there is correct, and then you're good to go. If you don't have a DUNS number, you can apply for one online at the same website. It can take up to 6 weeks for them to assign it to you because it's the federal government. It takes a little while. It usually doesn't take that long, but I don't like to bank on the fact that it's going to be quicker. So if you are interested to REAP grant at all, I recommend that you go to the DUNS website, which is linked in here somewhere, and I'll make sure I point that out, and look it up immediately and make sure you've either got one or that you need to apply to one. And then once you have the DUNS, you can apply. The DUNS, you can apply for a SAM. You can't apply for this beforehand. You have to have the DUNS to get it. SAM is a system for award management. It's another numeric identifier, but this is one that's specifically for receiving the grant money. So basically, this allows the federal government to both check that you're in compliance with all federal laws and eventually to give you the money if you are awarded the grant. As such, it does require your bank account information, which seems a little sketchy to people, but that is a thing they need. You're essentially setting up a direct deposit for the grant money. This can take another several weeks to process. You have to make absolutely sure that all of your information, especially your address, is exactly the same in the DUNS system, the SAM system, and on your taxes, because that's what they're going to use to verify it. Usually when it takes a long time, it's because the addresses don't match exactly, and they just can't get it to jive. This is, again, something Mass Farm Energy can help you with. I've done it a bunch of times. I'm happy to sit down with people and go through it together, or we can do it over the phone or whatever works. Like I said, we did do a webinar about this. It has some good screenshots and links and information, which is linked on that earlier slide, and that would probably be really useful. Okay. This is, as I mentioned, new this year for REAP. This is the Environmental Information Form. What I've got a screenshot of over there is actually the SHPO form, which I'll get to in just a second. But the environmental form is new this year, and some of the new requirements are that they're going to require an aerial map of the project location. This can usually be obtained from Google Earth or Google Maps. You don't have to get your own drone and fly it up there. You can just get it from the internet. Sometimes, if you're doing a solar project, solar contractors have this as part of their package, so you can just include that. And then you absolutely have to make sure that you talk about the size of your project, including any trenching if you're doing a solar project, which comes up a lot, and the impact, which means the impact that it potentially has on roads, rights of way, or protected lands like wetlands. Again, because it's a federal grant, you have to make sure you're following all the federal guidelines for things. And then protected resources are things like, again, wetlands or endangered species. Anything that's protected by law, your project can't interfere with. I would say this isn't usually a problem. Farms usually are pretty self-contained. Most solar arrays don't cause a lot of disturbance, even if they're ground-mounted. That's a little bit trickier than roof-mounted, but it's still mostly fine. If you're doing anything inside a building, it's usually not a problem. If you're getting new equipment or upgrading your lighting or something in a building that already exists, you're obviously not interfering with endangered species, so it's usually fine. One of the other things that's new is that you have to submit I'm calling it a SHPO form. It's the State Historic Preservation Officer. So if you're doing any project that requires or that involves ground disturbance or a historic district or building more than 50 years old, you will need to fill out this form that I've taken a screenshot of the first page of and submit it to the Massachusetts Historical Commission at 220 Morrissey Boulevard that you see listed on the top there. This needs to be done before you submit your REAP application. So the USDA will do this if you haven't done it beforehand, but if they do it, it's going to take a lot longer. There's a whole other weird process that it goes through, and it might end up that they don't get it back from this office in time to award the grant on the same schedule as the rest of them, so you might have to wait for the next round of REAP to get your grant award. So you really should get this together as soon as possible if you're doing something with ground disturbance or an historic building or historic district. As you'll hear many times, I have a copy of this. I'm happy to help you fill it out. It's really simple, especially if you're not like digging a big hole in the ground. It's pretty easy to do, and then you just mail it in. Nothing fancy. So now I'm going to go over some common questions about the REAP application. There's a few things that come up time after time, and hopefully some of you already have these questions and you'll be excited to see the answer. This is a really nice new evaporator that Steve's Sugar Shack in West Hampton put up. They actually got the full grant from MDAR, a full $30,000, and then only just over $3,000 from REAP, and the reason for that is the cost is only $33,000. They actually got the entire thing paid for with grants, which is not typical, but it did work out in this case. Oops, too far. So one thing that comes up a lot, do you have to own the land that you're doing your project on? And the answer is no, but you need to have control of it. So some kind of lease agreement or other thing that shows you have sort of permission to do whatever it is you're doing. It may need to be good for the lifetime use of the equipment, or the equipment must go with you. So typically you need to have a lease that's either going to be like, I'm here for the foreseeable future, or when I move my business, I'm going to take my new evaporator with me. Essentially, REAP wants to make sure that they don't fund something that's only going to last for a couple of years, and then everyone's like, never mind. What if I only have 1 meter? This comes up a lot, especially with farms. This is also going to come up under MDAR, but I'm going to mention it here too. If you only have 1 meter for a residence or any kind of residential use structure, so if you have somewhere where like your farmhands live, that counts as a residence, and the farm buildings, so anything used for the business, barns, garages, what have you, you have 2 options. You can either get an audit that includes a load analysis, and what that will do is essentially look at how much electricity is being used by the residents versus the farm, and I forget the percentage off the top of my head, but it's somewhere around 50%, I think, needs to be used by the business for the project to be eligible for REAP. They will also, if they find that the percentage isn't enough, they'll prorate the cost of your renewable energy system so that they're sort of imagining that it's sized only big enough to cover the business, and then that becomes the eligible cost instead of the entire cost of the system. This is something you can work out with your contractor and with the engineer or whoever does the audit, so you understand exactly how much energy is going where, and then how much that will be covered by the grant. I know that's a little bit confusing. It's much easier on a case-by-case basis. So if you only have 1 meter, the short answer is you need to get an audit, or you can put in a second meter. So if you think it would be easier to just get a second meter and totally separate your residence from your business, you can do that too. That is an eligible cost that's covered under the REAP grant. You can roll that into the cost you're requesting 25% of. Can you build a new structure? And the short answer is no. So you can't have new construction under REAP. It's not energy efficient to build something new or to purchase something new. So if you're currently not using any refrigeration and you want to get a new energy efficient refrigerator, that's great, and you should, but it's not going to qualify under this grant as energy efficiency because you were using no electricity for refrigeration and now you're using some, so your savings is non-existent. There is one exception to building a new structure, which is if the building is used for the exact same purpose and based on an audit, it will be more cost effective to construct a new one than to retrofit the existing one, then you can build a new building. I haven't ever seen that come up, but it is a possibility. But in general, if you're thinking, I'm going to build this new building, then it's probably not going to qualify for this grant. Now, if you want to build a new building and put solar on top of it, you can get the solar cost covered, but not the building cost. And then scoring and submitting. So this is the other thing that everyone really wants to know is how is my application going to be scored? Unfortunately for REAP, we have a great points breakdown. So BTU per grant dollar. BTU is a British thermal unit. It's a way of measuring energy. It's used by REAP because you can convert any kind of energy savings into BTUs. So you're saving electricity, propane, natural gas, cores of wood, whatever it is. They'll convert it into BTUs, and that way everyone's energy projects are evaluated on the same scale. So the more energy you save per grant dollar that you're requesting, the better. So you want to save a lot of energy for not a lot of money, which is what we all want, really. They're also going to look at the energy that's replaced, saved, or generated. So if you're doing a solar project that's only going to generate like 1,000 kilowatts a year or 1,000 kilowatt hours, it's not super great. They're going to want to look at projects that generate a lot more. All that means there 50 to 100% of historical is replacer. So that just means that you are replacing your current energy use with this rather than generating more than what you use and then selling it back to the grid. Environmental benefits. So again, they're going to look at how what you're doing benefits the environment. Obviously, anything that uses less electricity or less of anything that comes from fossil fuels benefits the environment. Commitment of funds, I again highlighted this in red. You can see that's worth the most points. Once again, just make sure you have the money to cover the full cost of the project up front, especially the 75% REAP isn't going to cover because this is a reimbursable grant, so you'll have to install and pay for the project and then get the money back after the fact. Size of the producer or rural small business, they, I think, favor smaller, so they're trying to help out the little guys, but that is not, like, the most important thing on here. Previous grantee or borrower, you get more points if you've never applied to a REAP grant before because you just want to spread it out to as many people as possible. But if you have applied before, that's fine. You can apply again. The simple payback, which is basically how long it's going to take the project to earn you back the money that you invested in it. There's a place in the application for calculating this. Obviously, shorter payback is better, so you want to make sure that you're saving enough money on a yearly basis that it's a cost-effective project. And then the state director or admin points, which are some points that they have discretion to give out based on a couple of different categories, which I've written down. So if there's an underrepresented technology, which is basically any renewable energy other than solar, geographic diversity, if they've never done a REAP grant in that town before, underserved populations, such as veterans, minority-owned or women-owned businesses, get a couple extra points. And if there are presidential initiatives that your project fits into, the most common one that projects fit into is buying local foods. And then also if you're in a poverty area, which again, USDA has a mapping system, they'll run it through. That's not a lot of points. That's not something that is really going to make or break your application. It's more like a tiebreaker at the end if they have two that are pretty much equal in everything else. That's sort of what they'll use. And then how do you submit it? So applications must be sent to any USDA rural Massachusetts office by 4:30 on the deadline date. You'll notice that it's green there where it says USDA Rural MA Office. That's because it's a link to all of the rural offices in Massachusetts. I think there are 4 of them. You can mail it in or you can deliver it by hand. A lot of people like to bring it there in person so they absolutely know that it got there. They have to be turned in hard copy. I know I said you should fill it out digitally if you can. That's just for ease of filling out and changing things. But it does need to go hard copy. It has to be the original with your original signatures on it, no scans, and you can't email it. However, I heard from the USDA today, or yesterday, that they would appreciate an emailed copy just because it will help them to process them faster. So you can email it in addition, but you must get the hard copy in by the deadline. Let's just skip to the bottom here. The deadline is April 2nd this year. The deadlines are usually March 31st and October 31st every year, but March 31st is, I think, a Saturday, so it's the next business day after that, which is April 2nd. Once you submit it, the USDA will review it for completeness. If you get it in before the deadline and you're missing something, they'll be able to tell you, hey, you're missing this, could you send it in? So it's good to get these in as soon as you can. You don't have to wait for the deadline to submit. you can submit it anytime that it's ready. So if you put your REAP application together tomorrow, you could submit it tomorrow. They will provide you with a receipt, so you'll know that they got it, and they will then score it. They'll also let you know if it passes environmental review pretty soon on. They may call you to get missing information, especially if you submit it before the deadline. And then once again, the spring deadline, again, is for projects of any size, and the fall deadline is for projects that are 80,000 or smaller, usually. If you have a bigger project, you can submit it, but you can only ask for $20,000. And then reporting. So after you report, or after you submit the application, you are required to do some reporting. I don't know a whole lot about this. It's not something that we typically help with. I usually point people directly to the USDA for help with this. But it starts the first full year after your construction, and it goes for either 2 years or 3 years, depending on, either 2 years or 3 years, depending on what kind of project it is, so if it's energy efficiency or renewable energy. And that concludes the information I have about REAP right now. If you have questions, just shoot them over in the little question box, and I will come back to them at the end. Now I'm going to talk about the MDAR grant. Again, this is the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. This is a state grant only for farms in Massachusetts. REAP is a federal grant, which means it applies to farms across the country. And this is only for people in Massachusetts. This is a picture of Mountain View Farm in Hampton. They just put up this solar PV this spring. As far as I know, it's actually not even connected to the grid yet, so it's brand new. They got $30,000 from MDAR. They also applied to REAP. They actually haven't heard back yet. So they applied in the fall, which was the end of October, and the REAP award announcements haven't been made yet here. It's March 1st. Just so you guys have an idea about the timeline with that. There were some extenuating circumstances in the federal government this year that made it a little bit slower than usual, but the timing's not that far off. So, MDAR grant assistance, this is just sort of it at a glance. Rather than REAP, which was a percentage of your cost, MDAR is just a flat up to $30,000. And you can't exceed the total cost of the project. So if your project only costs $20,000, you can't ask for $30,000 because you don't need it. But you can ask for any amount up to that as long as it's not more than what it costs. Something that comes up a lot, so I want to mention it, is you have to wait for notification of the grant before beginning your work. So if you apply to the MDAR grant and then you start construction like the next day, your cost will be ineligible. You won't be able to have them covered. You have to wait until you hear back from MDAR that you either awarded the grant or not before you can begin construction. And unlike REAP, there's only one application for all project sizes and types. There's only one deadline every year, so it's a little bit simpler than the REAP process. There's one application for the Ag Energy Grant, which is the General Renewable Energy or Energy Efficiency Grant, and also for special projects. I'll come back to special projects in a minute in a little more depth. It's essentially things that MDAR is especially looking to help farms do. And there's only one deadline. I don't know when the deadline is yet. The MDAR applications have not yet come out for this year. When they do, the deadline will be announced. In the past, it has been in early June. I expect it might be a little earlier this year because I think they're aiming to get the applications out earlier this year. I have a list of people that I'm notified when the applications come out. If you want to be on that list, you can just shoot me an email and I will put you on it, but MDAR will also make a big announcement. So who is eligible for MDAR? This comes up surprisingly more than you would think. It has to be a agricultural business that is significantly commercially involved in agriculture. So if you're just growing things for yourself and your family, you're not selling them, that doesn't count. You can't be like a homesteader. I also put the whole definition of farming up here. You don't necessarily need to read that. But I did want to highlight the keeping of horses as a commercial enterprise. This comes up a lot. If you are keeping horses, even though you're technically not like growing or raising them, that does count as agriculture in the state of Massachusetts. And then I also linked to the full legal definition at the bottom there if that's something that you have a question about. If you're not sure if you're going to count as a farm or you're not sure if you're significantly involved in agriculture, you can always ask me, and we'll run it by MDAR and make sure before we go applying to things. And then what technologies are eligible? It's more or less going to be the same as what's eligible for REAP. The application does have a full list of everything that's eligible, but pretty much anything that's commercially available and is energy efficient or renewable tech will be fine. And then, like I said, MDAR has special projects that are things they know that farms are particularly interested in, so they've set aside money for that. The amounts for special projects vary a little bit from the $30,000. They can be more or less than that. I listed here the project categories from last year. I don't know if they'll be the same for this year, but this should just give you an idea of what was available. So they were specifically interested in recovery for anaerobic digesters. The walk-in cooler one was something that a lot of farms took advantage of. Essentially, this is saying if you're using some kind of old refrigeration system, or if you're just using like normal residential refrigerators, and it would be really helpful for you to get a huge energy-efficient walk-in cooler. It's not necessarily going to use less energy than what you're using before. It's not exactly efficient, but it's really, really helpful, and it's more efficient in the long run, so they chose to incentivize that and help people out with that project. They're also really big into dual use of land. I expect that one will be on there again, which essentially means you put a ground-mounted solar somewhere on your property, and then you either grow crops, or I think this one was specifically for grazing animals or pasturing animals underneath it. That's something they're really into. And then I also just want to talk about the super efficient zero net energy new farm building construction. I know I talked about how new construction wasn't eligible for REAP. There are some instances under MDAR where it is, but it does have to be zero net energy, which is a little more extreme than just building a new building. I did have a farm go through this past year, and you will see a picture of that in a little bit. But not this one. This is Wilder Hill Gardens in Conway. They did a solar PV, and they were awarded $15,000 from MDAR, which was about half the cost of that project. I believe they built this building new, but the building cost wasn't covered as an eligible cost, just the cost of putting the solar on. So the MDAR application is a bit simpler than REAP. It's just one, either Word doc or PDF. I think it comes out in both forms. And then a couple of attachments. You don't need to submit your taxes for this one. You will, again, need a proposal from the contractor, so something that documents what the cost is going to be. The biggest difference is that MDAR requires an audit regardless of what your project is. So if you have an energy efficiency, a renewable energy, no matter what it costs or what the size, MDAR wants you to get an energy audit, or to have had one within the past like 3 or 4 years. That will include a load analysis if necessary. So that's, again, if you have a single meter for residential and commercial, the audit should include an analysis of how much electricity or power is going to each of those uses. Again, the commitment of funds documentation is a big deal for MDAR. This is another reimbursable grant, which means you have to have the money up front and pay for the project, and then you get reimbursed the amount that you were awarded. So you need to be able to demonstrate when you submit the application that you have enough money to pay for the project. And then other supplemental documents. There's not necessarily anything that MDAR lists specifically, but anything that backs up what you're saying in the application is good. So any documentation you have that's showing how much it's going to cost, how much it's going to save, if you have like a solar plot plan from your contractor which shows how much sun your farm gets, I usually advise people to include those. Anything that shows that you didn't just write down a number, that you have some backup for it is good. There's much fewer attachments than REAP, and there are no federal numbers required. So you don't need a DUNS number, you don't need a SAM code, you just need the MDAR application and a couple things to go with it. Do you need an audit? Yes, that is the short answer. You need an audit for the MDAR grant, or demonstrate the initiation or commitment for such. So if you can't quite get the auditor to come out there before the deadline, but you have a signed agreement that they're going to come, soon, or if they've already done the site visit and they're working on writing the audit, you can include that in the application, and that will demonstrate that you're committed to having this audit. And this is what I was mentioning before, a zero net energy building. This is Just a Mere Tree Farm in Worthington. They built a maple kitchen, which is why you can see those maple bottles and like a big industrial sink there. They are a maple syrup producer, and then they make value-added products with it. So they built this whole building. It's zero net energy, and it has a big solar thing on the top to help with that. They were awarded $40,000 from a special projects grant, and they also got a farm viability grant, which I'm going to talk about just a little bit later on. They are another farm that's applied to REAP and hasn't heard back yet, but you can see that the construction's gone on. So it is possible to do a zero net energy building, which is technically new construction, and get both the grants for it. To be clear, the REAP grant is only for the solar array on the top, not for the new construction of the building. So these are the common MDAR questions. Can I build a new structure? Again, it's possible under special projects. However, new construction is not funded under the basic ag energy grant. So just the essential efficiency or renewable energy grant does not cover new construction, just like REAP. It's only covered if it's a zero net energy building, or at least it was last year in the special project. I'm hopeful that'll be in there again this year. There are, however, other MDAR grants that are more fitting for new construction. So farm viability is a grant a lot of farms go for. I mentioned Just a Mere went for this one. It provides money to help farms with anything that will make them more economically viable. So obviously building a bigger, better, more efficient kitchen for his maple products made them more economically viable in the state. And that's how they were able to get that. There are a couple of other MDAR grants that I don't have as much experience with, but I can certainly, certainly get you to the people who are the administrators for those grants if we find that special project or the basic ag energy grant isn't a good fit. So this one comes up a lot too. What if I have APR land? If you don't know, APR is Agricultural Preservation Restriction. It's something that a lot of farms have where they basically say, I'm going to continue to use this land for agriculture and not develop it. It doesn't disqualify you from the grant. It doesn't disqualify you from installing renewable energy on your farm. You just have to run it by your APR representative and make sure that you have all the approvals required under your APR and that you remain in compliance with its terms before you submit the MDAR application. So you'll need to ask them for approval and submit documentation of that approval along with the application. And in general, if you're doing a renewable energy project on APR, it must be sized to serve no more than 200% of the load of the structures. So essentially what they're saying is they want to make sure that if you're doing renewable energy on your APR land, you are using that energy on the farm. You're not generating like way more than you need in order to sell it. They're trying to discourage solar farming, and solar farming in the sense that it's a farm of solar, not solar powered farming. And make sure that the renewable energy you're generating is going back into the farm. And can I submit multiple applications? And the answer is yes. So you can submit an application to the Ag Energy Grant and the Special Projects Grant. So if you want to build a zero net energy building, you can submit a grant for that, and then you can submit a separate grant for, say, the solar on top of it or an efficient refrigerator inside of it. You can also do the same for REAP. You can submit both renewable energy and an energy efficiency application. You can upgrade your refrigerator and your solar and ask for 2 different grants. They're 2 different projects. There is a limit to how much money you can ask for REAP that I didn't throw up here, but we can talk about that if it comes up. And then you can and should apply to both MDAR and REAP same project. Because one is a federal grant, one is a state grant, they're not mutually exclusive, they're completely different pots of money. If you are doing a solar project, you really should apply to both. You'll notice a lot of farms that talk about apply to both. It's great to do that. You get 2 opportunities for grant funding. Obviously, you can't ask for more money than your project costs, but that's usually not a problem. And just a small note, you can't apply to both MDAR and MFET for the same project. Because Mass Farm Energy is part of MDAR, our money comes from the same place as their money, and you can't get money from both us and them for the same project. Again, this doesn't really come up that often. Usually I just have farms apply to MDAR because it's a lot more money. It's $30,000 as opposed to $4,000 is what ours tapped out at. And that doesn't include the audit funding. So the audit funding is totally separate. You can apply to us for audit funding and them for a project. That's not at all the same. Submitting the MDAR application. So these, again, must be submitted hard copy via mail. You can't fax them. You can't email them. They have not asked for an email copy, so you just got to bring it in hard copy. As I said before, the deadlines haven't been established yet. They've been in June previously. I'm assuming that they will be earlier this year, but I'll let you know. I do have a notification list, so if you want to be on that, just send me over an email. I did want to also mention that you won't get any of your documentation back for this or for the REAP grant. So whatever you submit, especially your taxes, please make sure it is a copy because you will never see it again. There are no written reporting requirements for MDAR, which is another way that it really differs from REAP. MDAR will periodically check on the progress of awarded projects to ensure they meet the completion deadline. MDAR's fiscal year ends on June 30th every year, so you need to have your project completed by June 30th, 2019 for this round of MDAR grants. And then I did just want to do a little plug here at the end. We are approaching the end of this webinar, so I hope everyone's enjoying it. The Center for Ecotechnology is working with Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, or the MassDEC, on a solar hot water initiative where we're trying to encourage businesses and farms across the state of Massachusetts to install solar hot water, if that's something that is a good fit for them. You can see here Dave Smith from Smith's Country Cheese, which is actually owned by Jake and Allie Catlin now, but it was Dave when we did this project. They did a solar thermal install, which he's standing proudly in front of. They were awarded a $25,000 MDAR grant for that. I just wanted to mention this because on top of the MDAR and REAP grants that you can apply for to fund a project, MassDEC has some pretty hefty initiatives for solar thermal. And there is a single point person, which is me. So if you are interested in solar thermal at all or anything having to do with these grants, you just got to contact me. We try to keep it as simple as possible. If you look in that green bar there, you'll see the sectors that this is particularly applicable to, and one of them is dairy farms. It's not only for dairy farms. Any farm with a significant year-round hot water use could find this useful, but we find that dairy farms, or in Dave's case, dairy and cheese baking farms, use enough hot water all the time for it to be applicable. All right, that is pretty much the end. Here is my contact information. That's me. I'm Megan. That number is the Mass Farm Energy hotline number. It rings right to my phone, and nobody else answers it, so you'll get me. I've also listed Jerry Polano. He is our client at MDAR, and he runs the MDAR Ag Energy and Special Projects Grant Program. If I have a question I can't answer, I will ask him. And then the contacts at USDA are Ann Correa and Jonathan Burns. If you have a question, excuse me, you can just bring it to me. If I don't know about REAP, I will ask them. I'm expecting there will probably be some today that I'll have to ask them about. But if you feel like it's really specific and I'm probably not going to know the answer, just go right to them. Ann has been working on this program for a very long time, and she's seen just about everything. So she knows pretty much all the answers. I will go back to the slide in a minute, but I just want to say thank you. Thank you for coming. I'm going to look at your questions now and look at them and try and answer them to the best of my ability, or get you the answers if I can't. I just wanted to say this is Zach Swan from Northeast Solar at Little Brook Farm with a goat. It's one of my favorite pictures. And that is a Highland cow there at Flat Rock Farm in Chesterfield. They didn't actually apply for an MDAR grant. They were able to utilize enough money from their utility and from the Mass Farm Energy Program to fund those high-efficiency waterers. So you see that cow drinking out of right there? So you can get a lot of funding from a lot of places, I guess is the bottom line. Okay. Let's see what I've got for questions here, and feel free to put them in. Can REAP be used for installing PV power to be pulled from farm to grid? I'm not totally sure about that. I think they want to, I think the idea is probably for most of the solar to go back to the farm, but I will check because I know that some projects have been bigger and it has been sold back to the grid. I know that REAP gets into things that are appropriately sized. So appropriately sized means they want it to work for the size of your farm and not be too big or too small. So I'm thinking probably not if that's your intention, but if some of it is extra and gets sold back to the grid, that's probably fine. But I could double check on that for you with REAP. The next one says, can REAP be used for co-location ag PV power to be sold from farm into grid? I think that's sort of the same question. I will also find out the answer to that. Is it okay to start construction before hearing back from REAP? So that is slightly different than MDAR. The short answer is not really. What REAP will do is they will go over your application and run it through their environmental review. If it passes environmental review, so they make sure that the project isn't going to violate any federal laws or mess with a wetland or something, then you can begin the construction. But you do have to wait to hear back from them about that. And you do have to sign a waiver that essentially says, I'm proceeding at my own risk, understanding that I might not get the grant. I don't know if I've actually had any farms do that yet, but it's something that you can work out with Ann and Jonathan. Okay, looking to increase substandard, not code insulation in an ag building. Is this a possible qualified project? It absolutely is. If increased insulation is going to decrease your heating costs, so it's going to make the building more efficient, that counts as an energy efficiency project. I would start with whoever is your utility for heating the building. If it's an electric or natural gas utility, they have insulation incentives. If you're heating with oil or propane, then you can apply to one of these, and the MSEP program will also help you with that. I would also start with getting some kind of audit or assessment so that you know exactly how much energy you're going to save with the insulation project. But yes, that is qualified. Does anyone else have any questions? I am not seeing anything else pop up here. I'm going to just go back to my contact info so everybody has it. This question, will I be around for a call this afternoon? Yes, I will. After this, I have just a quick break for lunch, and I should be at my desk for the rest of the afternoon, and then I'm there from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, most of the time. And if you leave me a message, I pretty much always get back to people. You can also email me anytime. Try to be responsive. Sorry, my question thing went away, and I'm trying to get it back. Sorry, guys, my question box got real small. There we go. Okay, where is our office? So I am currently located in Florence, which is near Northampton. CET also runs the Eco Building Bargain Store in Springfield, so we have a location there. And I have actually met with farms there from time to time, so that's a better location for them. And we also have an office out in Pittsfield. But if you want to meet with me, probably your best bet is Florence. Can the grants apply to a project that supplies an ag operation and a non-ag operation? That is an interesting question, and it's really going to depend on which grant you're talking about. The MDAR grant is pretty much exclusively for agricultural operations, as it is the Department of Agricultural Resources. But the REAP grant, since it is for small businesses as well, can probably be applied to that. It's something that I would want to talk to you more about and get more details about your operation and how much energy is going where. So you could feel free, Sarah, there to give me a call and we could talk about that. But in general, I would say REAP yes, MDAR probably not. Unless, again, of course, you get a load calculation, and it depends on what the project is, basically. Okay. I am building a greenhouse, which needs power. Could this qualify as an MDAR special projects grant, or maybe not, because the greenhouse itself will already be built? If the greenhouse is already built before MDAR, it's probably not going to qualify. Let me go back real quick and look at the greenhouse special project. I know there was something about that up there. Commercial scale, high efficiency, and renewable energy urban ag greenhouses. My guess is probably not, just because I assume you're talking about just getting power to a greenhouse structure that's new. It's probably going to fall under new construction. However, it could be applicable to a farm viability or a different kind of grant. It's just probably not going to fall under this one. Again, that's something that I would need to get more information about, and I might even run it by Jerry because he knows all the different permutations of things that can qualify or not. And it will depend to some extent on what this year's special projects categories are, because again, they haven't come out yet, so I don't know. I would just say I'd like to talk to you more, find out more details about it. If we don't have any power on our farm, would we be eligible for installing solar? I think so. If you're not currently using any electricity and you want to put in solar to power what you're doing, I believe that is eligible. Mostly because solar is typically based on how much it's generating. And you can, in the course of an audit or assessment, get, I don't want to say a guess, but you can get an estimate of how much energy your farm is going to use, even though you don't know how much you're using currently. That's something that the engineers can figure out to make sure that the system is sized appropriately. So I believe that, yes, solar would be eligible, even if you don't currently have power. It is probably something I would run by the administrator for whichever grant you're applying to, but I don't think it'll be a problem. I do know also that MDAR had a special grant recently for solar projects that included batteries, so for solar storage, and it might be eligible under that as well. All right. Anybody else? I will probably be able to get these slides out to you today. I have a pretty big, I have a list of everyone's email addresses from when you registered, and then you'll have all the links to the resources that are in here and all my contact information. And I'll be happy to answer more specific questions, from now until ever.